discussed on this podcast are determined by the Justice Coordinating Commission of the Sisters of Providence of St. Mary of the Woods, Indiana. Guest opinions do not necessarily reflect those of the Sisters of Providence. To learn more, go to www.spsmw.org.
Welcome to the JUSTUs podcast, where we talk about creating an equitable human community and influencing change. Through shared stories, conversation, and inspiration, we hope you will learn how you can make a difference in your community. I am your host today, Sister Barbara Batista. Our guest, Reverend Bill Breeden, is joining us in this shared space to discuss his work towards abolishing the death penalty. We also will learn about a project supporting family and loved ones' visits to the men on federal death row. The project is known as the Death Row Visitation Project. Reverend Bill and myself are both involved in that project. We hope that, motivated by Bill's experiences and insights, that you will be inspired to take action for the common good. If not now, tell me when. Okay, so let me just set the stage a little bit for our conversation today. I'm going to give just a brief overview of capital punishment, or execution, which has been practiced by the human community throughout our history and has taken many forms. In 2022, the 5 countries that executed the most people were, in descending order, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and yes, you guessed it, the United States. Only 27% of United Nations members and observer states, which there are 193 in total, maintain the death penalty, either in law and some in practice. So, one well-known abolitionist, Sister Helen Prejean, continues to remind her listeners how capricious the death penalty is, how unevenly it is applied. Abolitionists, lawyers, court watchers all agree that the death penalty is not a deterrent to violent crime. And yet, here we are in 2024 discussing capital punishment in America. Right now, according to the Death Penalty Information Center's 2023 report, 29 states have either abolished or paused execution by executive action. So that brings us to where we are today. And my first question. First of all, Reverend Bill, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself a little bit more than just giving me your name?
Okay. Well, I'm a native-born Hoosier, that's Indiana resident. My twin brother and I were the third set of twins and 3 singles, the last in a family of 3 sets of twins and 3 singles. And so it's kind of unique to grow up in a family that bizarre. But I grew up in a very conservative church. I started preaching when I was 15 years old in tent revivals. I thought I knew all the answers. And to make a long story short, I only ended up with a few questions. The holy questions, who am I, how did I get here, where am I going, and that kind of thing. So attending college and seminary and conservative seminaries and college, mostly. I also went to St. Paul's School of Theology in Kansas City, which at that time was quite radical. But a lot of things just changed my life, and I found myself asking questions rather than giving answers. And I was early on a supporter of the death penalty. Even after I became rather progressive, I really didn't consider it a lot until I met Bill Selke and Marietta Yeager, the co-founders, or some of the co-founders of Murder Victims Families for Reconciliation. And they, and I also, I joined them on their walk in Indiana. And then later on, within a year or so, Sister Helen Prejean called for the conference in Washington, D.C. of religious leaders. And Glenda and I went to that and met Helen Prejean. And if you've never met Helen Prejean, go find her. It's one of the most remarkable people I've ever met in my life. Deliriously funny and deliriously serious about it ending the death penalty. And so I promised her at that time that I would preach a sermon against the death penalty in every church I pastored at least once a year, and have been involved ever since. Really.
Wow, yeah. And I would agree with you about Sister Helen. She
Oh,
is
yeah.
remarkable.
Wonderful
Yes.
woman. I've even touched her Pope spot where the Pope kissed her.
Yeah, so I noticed both you and I think both have already used that phrase, death row. Or, what is, when we say death row, what is that?
Well, it's a lot of cells of solitary confinement, and it's torture. As Leo Tolstoy said in his book, The Kingdom of God is Within You, the worst means of human torture is a solitary cell. So you have men on federal death row in Terre Haute, they're all men. And you have them in the solitary cells, windows they can't see out of, and it's torture. That's what it is, really, and it makes no sense whatsoever. Amazingly, some of the people who find themselves, and I had an experience with one that was just beyond belief, really. Corey Johnson was a man, one of the last three to be executed during the Trump murder spree. And with three left, I asked a lawyer to find out if they had ministers, because that's the only ones that can go in the death chamber with you. And you, Barbara, did it twice. I mean, if I have to, I can do it again, but I hope to God I never have to. And so I met Corey Johnson. He was in solitary confinement for 29 years without a visitor. And he couldn't read or write very well at all. He was dyslexic and never learned to do so. And yet I met one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met in my life. I've been in a small dinner with the Dalai Lama. I've met Archbishop Tutu. Both of them are my heroes. But Corey Johnson is that kind of quality human being. He discovered what it meant to be a human being all by himself for 29 years, never seeing the moon or stars for 29 years. And he became a human being. That's a wonderful human being.
Thanks for that. I'm going to back us up a little bit just so that our listeners are clear. Yes, we both, Reverend Bill and myself, we were involved in vigiling, protesting, standing witness against the killing spree of the federal government from July of 2020 to January of 2021. I think the last execution was 5 days before the inauguration, if I have those dates correct. Yeah, so when we say the killing spree, that's really what it was. 13 persons executed over the course of 6 months in the final days of the previous president's term.
Yes.
So you accompanied Corey Johnson, and yes, I accompanied Will LaCroix and Keith Dwayne Nelson. You're the guest today, so we're going to focus more on your experience. So what was it like to be in that death chamber with Corey?
Well, it was hell. It really was. That's about as best description I can make. When they separate everybody, and I sit out in the van with the chaplain for quite a while before they took me in. By the time you walk in, Corey is strapped to a cross. It's so unbelievably cross-like.
So I'll just, for our listeners, Bill's putting his arms straight out, directly perpendicular from his chest. Arms straight out, heads up, feet down, like in the form of a cross.
Yeah, the only thing missing is the nails, really. He could only wiggle his fingers, all he could move. When I met with him, I shared a lot with Corey. I had about probably close to 30 hours with him in the last several weeks of his life. So I went to see him a lot, and also went online and asked for donations to bring his family, as you know. And in a week or so, I raised, $6,000 or something like that. But then his lawyers paid all the expenses for his family. Said, "You keep it," and I gave it to the wonderful Sisters of Providence that helped me do this. And so we started a visitation program. I had told Corey a lot of things. One of the things I shared with him early on, well, just to say what kind of person he was. When I contacted his lawyer and found out he had been in solitary for 29 years without a visitor, I said, am I going to be able to talk to him? I mean, is he insane? Well, he said, you're going to meet one of the most remarkable men you've ever seen. When his lawyer told him that I would volunteer to be his minister, uh, Corey didn't want a minister. He signed a paper when he went on death row saying he had no religion, so he couldn't have a minister. So the lawyer's trying to talk me into it. He said, listen, all you have to do is get the paper back from the chaplain, the religious preference paper, change it to Unitarian Universalist. Corey says, I can't do that. He said, what do you mean you can't do that? He said, I don't know what a Unitarian Universalist is. It would be a lie. His lawyer said, Jesus, Corey, they're going to kill you. You can tell a little lie. He said, I think it'll help you to have somebody in there that doesn't want to kill you. And so he finally said yes. And I've never met anybody quite like him. All the men on the road called him the gentle giant. He was about 6'7", big man. And in 29 years, he was never written up by a guard. I've never met a prisoner. I've been written up when I was in jail. You can get written up for almost anything.
That's amazing.
It was 29 years without a single write-up. And the men on the row said they'd never heard him raise his voice in anger in any way. He was one of the most gentle souls I've ever met. I read to him The Velveteen Rabbit, which I want to say, if you have children or grandchildren, buy that book, make sure you read it to them. But there's a phrase in there that says, when the stuffed rabbit is asking the old horse in the playroom of the child, said, what does it mean to be real? What does it mean to be real? Is it being like these toy soldiers that have wind-up gears? And the old horse says, no. Being real, you become real when somebody loves you for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And once you've become real, you can never be real again. And so Corey used that in his last words. He thanked his family. He said, you've made me real. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, on the morning of his execution, I met with him and I asked him about his last words. I wish I had brought them with me. I didn't think to do so today. But he can't read, but I said to him, if you want to dictate to me, I'll write it down. And I arranged it a little bit because he was a little bit scattered at the time. But I don't think he started. I also told him about the African tradition that says you're never dead until your name is forgotten. And his first words in his page, in his last words were, don't worry about me, I'm at peace. Remember these names. And he listed the names of every one of his victims. As you may know, he was an enforcer for drug in the drug war. And he and two others were convicted of 7 murders. And I told him, I said, you killed the wrong people. Should have joined the army and killed 7 Iraqi citizens. We'd give you a medal and a commutation. But he thought about that fact of you're never dead until your name is forgotten, and he listed the names. And he said, the very next thing he said is, I want to apologize to the family. I would have done so a long time ago. I know you're suffering, but I didn't know how to do it. And I asked him. I had told him ahead of time, the federal people, that I wanted to read Corey's last words, and I wanted to offer a prayer. The first thing I did was let me pray. And at the end of the prayer, I said that I believe that Corey would say, as Jesus did, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of aggravated the main executioner. He was a really hard-nosed person. And then he would not let me read Corey's words. And when he finally did announce the execution, we stood there for well over an hour that we were in there waiting for the court, to make a final decision. And Corey and I conversed a little bit. But finally, when the guy announced the execution like it was some kind of carnival show, he just screamed it out, let it begin. And the victim's family stand up cheering, whistling like it was they won the basketball tournament. And I don't think he would have done that if he would have let me read Corey's last words. He said, Corey has to read them. I said, Corey can't read. Besides that, he's strapped down. And I finally said, Corey, do you want to try to read these? And he said, no, let's just get on with it. But I don't think the families would have responded that way had they heard his last words. And then the only redeeming thing in the whole thing, and it was hell. I still have I'm claustrophobic now, which I've never been in my life. I still have nightmares occasionally. Wake up about it. But the only redeeming thing was his family was right behind me to the left in the room, the viewing room. And they are informed when they go in there that if you make any noise at all, we will remove you. But his brother, who he had not seen for 29 years until that year, started hollering, "I love you, bro. I love you, bro." And he did that. I mean, I don't know how long it was. A lot. He never stopped until until it was over and they were going out. And Corey could hear him, of course. So it was just an amazing experience that I hope it never happens again. It was amazing the grace of his brother. Corey's grace was an amazing thing to experience. Uh, I didn't get to touch him until after he was dead. And I said a prayer for him. And one of the things that Corey was most disappointed in his life was he said, "I've never accomplished anything." He took the GED 29 times and flunked it. 29 times. He said, "I really wanted to get my GED." And so when I blessed his body, I said, "Corey, you think that you have not accomplished something, but maybe this death, this insanity right here will help us stop this." And so that really aggravated the head guy, and he he grabbed a microphone and he came at me really strong. And he wouldn't wear a mask. This was when COVID was breaking out in that because of the executions. And there's signs everywhere wear a mask. This guy wouldn't wear one. And he came right up in my face and started screaming at me, saying, "We do this so nobody else has to." And I just said, "Look, I don't hate you." I said, "I'm going to be praying for you." And he picked up the microphone and said, "Remove the minister of record." And they came in and took me out. So I don't think I really realized the long-term impact of being in the death chamber until this last year, early this spring, when I went under my house to do some work. And it's a narrow space. It's only about less than 2 feet high, and I got in and had a panic attack, which I've never had in my life, and had to get out. I haven't been down there since. I'm going to try it again this summer before it's over. But the impact of that, I don't think anybody can begin to imagine what it really is like. And you can because you've been there. And but Corey was a remarkable human being. One like I've never met before.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that story of Corey, of you and Corey Johnson, of his family. In fact, that's a great entryway into this next part of our conversation. And I want to say, too, that I've been in touch with some of Corey's family, perhaps his sister-in-law. And so what is it about Corey's story that leads us into this death row visitation project?
Well, I told Corey that I would make sure his name was never forgotten. So for me, this is a dedication to Corey Johnson. And the fact that the lawyers paid for it and left us these funds, and you all were willing to take, because I'm not an administrator in any way. I don't even do my own checkbook. I mean, Glenda, I don't deal with figures and things at all. So it was a real, a godsend for me when you all said you would take care of this and manage it. And I'm really pleased that we do get donations. I will say for this podcast, I'm sure there will be a way that you can figure out how to tell them how to donate.
Oh, sure.
It's expensive to bring people. Death row, the federal death row is so different than state death row because in state death row, most families are in the same state. And we have a Russian in death row, so we have tried to get his family here. That would be a complicated affair. But we've had people come from long ways away, and it's amazing the man who committed suicide here recently, was it the last name? I don't remember. I'm having trouble. I'm getting old. But his son came to see him, and he had gone to death row when his son was 14 years old, and they had not seen each other since. And I got to go meet the son when he came out of death row, and to see the difference in what these family members, and I've seen many of the family members, how much it means to them. It's just amazing. And his son told me, he said, I'd like to bring my children up to see him. They've never seen him, never met him. But he said, I've never considered Dad as a grandfatherly type. And I said, well, I'll tell you one thing. When you walk in that visiting room with your baby, you have a little baby, so you're going to see a grandfather on the other side of the glass. There's no doubt. Sadly, the father committed suicide before they could come up. But it made all the difference in the world to his son to reconnect with him. And I think that's what's been most it just inspires me every time I meet one of these families who've come a long way, and most of them have never been in a prison like federal death row, never visited such a thing. They're scared, all kinds of emotions involved, but they come away with a real appreciation of their family, and I just can't tell you how good it is that I get to do that.
Exactly. I'll echo that. It was Raheed Corley, Odell Corley,
Yes,
otherwise known as Nasi Raheed.
that's right.
And in fact, this project, the Death Row Visitation Project, which is a 501c3 and all donations are tax deductible, we were able to, through an emergency process, provide transportation for the entire family, the ones that did not get to see him
Yes.
alive. So his son brought all, five or six
I
people.
wish I could have been there for that.
Yeah. And as it happened, it was up in northern Indiana.
Yeah, for the funeral.
For the funeral.
Absolutely. That just says volumes about the program, really.
Yes.
That you were able to, reassign some money to do that, even though the man had died. That's really.
Yes, absolutely. And so, our time is running short. There's so much we could tell. I have a hunch we're going to ask you back for another follow-up podcast.
Anytime.
Maybe you'll sit in the host chair and I'll be the guest.
That'd be
You
kind
never
of fun.
know.
We can switch around.
You never know. So yeah, you'll hear. We'll put in the show notes. We'll put the donation link, but I'll say it out loud right now too. It's spsmw.org/donate for justice. That's Sisters of Providence, St. Mary the Woods.org/donate for justice. You'll be hearing more about that in our newsletter as well as in follow-up podcasts. So, we do these podcasts because we want to give people a chance to act, to take action on behalf of justice. So, one of the things we haven't really touched on, but I'll just briefly explain. Our current president was campaigning on the promise to abolish the death penalty. That hasn't happened yet.
We need to get after him.
So one of the calls to action is to call the president, write the president, and remind him and call for abolishing the death penalty. How about, could you come up with another action we can ask our persons? Supporting the persons on death row? What? Being pen pals? Do you have some thoughts? It's one more action.
Sure. I think becoming a pen pal is an interesting thing. I've been invited to be the keynote speaker in London in October, which is really blowing me away, to a group called Lifeline International. And they're a group around the globe who have pen pals on death rows in Indiana, in the United States, not just in death row federal, but states. And actually, the man who has been a pen pal for my guy, for whom I'm the minister of record, Chad Fawkes, has been writing him for several years, and they started talking about me, and that ended up in me being invited to be their keynote speaker in London, which it sounds really cool. And so it's Lifelines International, and I suppose you can contact them, and they'll find out a way to do it. But we also have Glenda and I and our Unitarian Church in Bloomington, we help people get to become pen pals. And I'm going to be going to another UU church, to do a workshop on the do's and don'ts of pen palship, because there are things you want to be aware of. But I think that people cannot imagine what a gift that it will be to make a link with the life of a person in solitary confinement.
Exactly.
It's impossible to measure how powerful it is for them in solitary to receive a letter from someone. It absolutely makes their day.
Yes.
And yet I found my guy Chad, when he started writing me, I don't know how many years ago now, they were almost childlike, but he's grown so much and read books so much that every letter I get just shows great advancement in his thinking.
That's wonderful. Yeah, so I hate to do this, but we've run out of time. So first, I want to thank you, Reverend Bill. It's been great having you with us. I know our listeners will appreciate your insights, your willingness, your vulnerability to share your experience. And for sure, as we say at the beginning, this podcast series is all about inviting our listeners to action on behalf of justice.
Absolutely. I mean, if enough of us act, you can move a mountain if enough of us act. That's all there is to it.
Exactly. We ask you, listeners, to leave your comments or reviews or any other suggested topics you might have at spsmw.org/podcast. The name of our podcast, again, Just Us. Just Us. This podcast is a production of the Sisters of Providence of St. Mary of the Woods. I'm your host, Sister Barbara Batista. The production is coordinated by the Providence Justice Coordinating Commission. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.